The email invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 months before the event it was announcing. I'd been having coffee at my kitchen counter, scrolling through work messages on my phone, when the notification popped up. Morrison Family Reunion, July 15th. You're invited. I opened it with the kind of cautious optimism that comes from years of being disappointed by family interactions, but still hoping, against all evidence, that maybe this time would be different. The email was elaborately designed. Someone had clearly spent time on it, probably hired a graphic designer, definitely put more effort into the invitation than anyone in my family had put into maintaining a relationship with me over the past decade. There were photos from previous reunions arranged in a decorative border, smiling faces of aunts and uncles and cousins I barely knew anymore, all looking prosperous and happy and like they belonged to something I'd never quite been part of. Join us for the 50th annual Morrison Family Reunion, the header proclaimed. 3 days of celebration, reconnection, and family tradition at the Riverside Resort and Conference Center, Friday, July 15th through Sunday, July 17th. Accommodations, meals, and activities included. Come celebrate our heritage and strengthen our family bonds. I scrolled through the details. The resort looked impressive, expensive, definitely. 5-star ratings, golf course, spa, multiple restaurants, conference facilities that could accommodate large groups. This wasn't the usual Morrison reunion held in someone's backyard with potluck dishes and folding chairs. This was something bigger, fancier, more ambitious. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. At the bottom of the email was a note from my Aunt Patricia, who'd apparently taken over organizing duties from my grandmother after she'd passed away 2 years ago. We're making this reunion extra special in honor of what would have been Dorothy's 90th birthday. She always believed family was everything. Let's honor her memory by bringing everyone together for an unforgettable celebration. I felt the familiar mix of emotions that family communications always triggered. Obligation mixed with dread, mixed with a stubborn, irrational hope that maybe this time they'd treat me like I actually belonged. I RSVP'd yes. Booked my room at the resort, paying for it myself, as the email had made clear that while the event itself was covered by generous family contributions, individual accommodations were each person's responsibility. Started marking the days on my calendar, and tried not to think too hard about why I was setting myself up for another weekend of being reminded that I'd never quite measured up to Morrison family standards. The problem started 3 weeks before the reunion, during a family video call that Patricia had organized to discuss logistics and finalize plans. I'd logged on from my home office, adjusting my camera so the bookshelf behind me looked presentable, trying to look engaged and enthusiastic, even though these family calls always made me anxious. There were about 20 people on the call, various aunts and uncles, some older cousins, Patricia running the meeting with the efficiency of someone who'd spent her career in corporate management. She went through the schedule. Friday evening welcome reception, Saturday morning family history presentation, Saturday afternoon activities, Saturday evening formal dinner, Sunday morning brunch, and farewell. Now, for the Saturday evening dinner, Patricia said, pulling up what looked like a seating chart on her screen. We need to finalize arrangements. We have 140 people confirmed, which means we'll need careful organization to make sure everyone has a good experience. She started going through table assignments. The head table would include the oldest living family members, my grandfather, my great-aunt Ellen, a few others from that generation. The tables surrounding them would be for my parents' generation, the aunts and uncles who'd been most involved in organizing the reunion, the cousins who'd achieved the most impressive careers. I watched as she assigned seats, and I noticed a pattern. The closer to the head table, the more successful the family member. My Uncle Robert, the surgeon. My Aunt Caroline, the attorney. My cousin David, who'd founded a tech startup. My brother Trevor, who worked in finance. my sister Vanessa, who did something in pharmaceutical sales that apparently paid very well. And for the back tables, Patricia continued, we'll put the younger cousins, the ones who are still in school or just starting out, the ones who haven't quite established themselves yet. We want to give the seats of honor to family members who've really made something of themselves, who exemplify what the Morrison family stands for. I felt my stomach tighten. I was 34 years old. I had a career, a life, accomplishments that mattered to me even if they didn't look impressive on paper. But I knew where this was going. Marcus, Patricia said, and there was something in her tone, not quite pity, not quite dismissal, but something in between. We're going to put you at table 18. That's near the back, but you'll still be able to see and hear everything. We just need to prioritize seating for family members who've achieved more visible success. Silence on the call. I could see other people's faces in their video squares, some looking uncomfortable, some nodding in agreement, most just waiting for the awkward moment to pass. I have a career, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm a librarian, head of adult services at a major public library system. I have a master's degree. I serve on professional boards. I've built a life I'm proud of. Of course, dear, Patricia said, in that tone people use when they're being condescending while pretending to be supportive. And we're all very proud of you for finding something you enjoy. But you have to understand, we're trying to seat people according to their level of achievement. And while being a librarian is certainly nice, it's not quite the same as what others in the family have accomplished. You make what, $50,000 a year? $58,000? Right. Well, your brother makes that in a month. Your sister probably makes it in 2 weeks. We're trying to honor the family members who've really excelled, who've shown what's possible when you set high goals and work toward them. I'm sure you understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that my family measured worth by salary and status, that they'd decided years ago that I'd failed to live up to Morrison standards, that no matter what I accomplished in my actual life, I'd always be the disappointment, the one who'd chosen a career they didn't respect, the one who didn't make enough money to warrant a good seat at the family table. Table 18 is fine, I said, because arguing would only make it worse, would only give them more ammunition for their narrative that I was difficult or defensive or unable to accept reality. Wonderful, Patricia said brightly. I knew you'd understand. Now, moving on to the activities schedule. I stayed on the call for another 30 minutes, nodding and smiling and pretending I wasn't hurt, wasn't angry, wasn't already regretting my decision to attend this reunion at all. After the call ended, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at my computer screen, thinking about that seating chart and what it represented. A physical manifestation of exactly where my family thought I belonged. In the back, away from the accomplished people. Seated with the family members who hadn't quite established themselves yet. I thought about canceling, about sending a polite email saying something had come up. I couldn't make it after all. Maybe next time. About saving myself the humiliation of literally being put in the back of the room while my family celebrated the successful people who actually mattered. But then I thought about my grandmother Dorothy, who the reunion was supposedly honoring, who'd been the only family member who'd ever treated me like I had value beyond my salary, who'd told me she was proud of me when I got my library degree, who'd visited me at work and marveled at the programs I'd created, who'd understood that meaningful work wasn't always the same as lucrative work. She would have wanted me there, would have been disappointed if I'd let my hurt feelings keep me away. So I decided to go. But I also decided something else. If my family wanted to judge people by their financial contributions, by their ability to fund expensive events and impress others with their wealth, then maybe it was time they learned exactly what I was capable of contributing. I opened my laptop and started making phone calls. The first call was to my financial advisor, a woman named Grace Chen, who'd been managing my investments for the past 8 years. We'd built a comfortable working relationship based on her discretion and competence, 2 qualities I valued highly. Marcus, she said when she picked up, her voice warm but professional. It's been a while since we talked. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. I need to discuss a large withdrawal. There was a pause. How large? Around $150,000. Another pause, longer this time. That's approximately 40% of your portfolio. Can I ask what this is for? A family event. I want to sponsor it, anonymously initially. But I need to move quickly. The event is in 3 weeks. Marcus, you know I have to ask. Is this really the best use of your money? You've been very disciplined about building this portfolio. Taking out 40% would significantly impact your long-term projections. I understand, and I appreciate your concern. But this is important to me. I need to do this. She sighed. Okay. Let me ask a different way. Is this going to make you happy? Or is this about proving something to people who maybe don't deserve the proof? Grace knew some of my family history. Not all of it, but enough to understand that my relationship with them was complicated. We'd had conversations over the years about my financial goals, about why I lived modestly despite having more money than anyone in my family realized, about what actually mattered to me. Maybe both, I admitted. Maybe it's about proving something, but it's also about honoring my grandmother's memory, and maybe about teaching some people a lesson about assumptions. Well, when you put it that way, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Let me work up the paperwork. How do you want to structure this? We spent the next hour going over details. The money would be transferred to a separate account, then used to cover the costs my Aunt Patricia had mentioned were being covered by generous family contributions. I'd work through a third party initially. Grace's firm would serve as an intermediary, so the family wouldn't know the money was coming from me until the right moment. You're sure about this? Grace asked one more time before we finalized everything. Completely sure. Then let's do it. The second call was to Patricia. This one required more careful navigation. Marcus, she said when she answered, that same bright, condescending tone from the video call. What can I do for you? I wanted to check in about the reunion financing. You mentioned generous family contributions are covering the event costs. I was curious how that was being managed. Oh, well, your Uncle Robert contributed significantly, and your Aunt Caroline, and your parents put in quite a bit. We've been collecting donations from family members who can afford to help make this reunion special. Those of us who've been blessed with success like to give back to the family. The implication was clear. She wasn't expecting a contribution from me. What's the total budget for the event? Around $180,000. The venue alone is $85,000 for the 3 days, plus meals, activities, the formal dinner, entertainment. It's expensive, but we wanted to do something truly memorable. And how much has been collected so far? She hesitated. About $95,000. We're still short, actually. We've been trying to figure out where to cut costs, maybe eliminate some activities, downgrade the Saturday dinner menu, that sort of thing. What if someone wanted to cover the remaining balance, anonymously? Silence. Then, are you offering to contribute, Marcus? Because that's very sweet, but we're talking about $85,000 here. That's probably more than you make in 2 years. We wouldn't want you to strain yourself. I let that condescension sit for a moment. Then, I have someone who might be interested in sponsoring the event. A contact from my professional network who believes in family legacy and wants to honor the memory of Dorothy Morrison. They'd like to remain anonymous until the event itself, but they're prepared to cover the full remaining costs, plus a bit extra for anything you might have cut from the original plans. Someone wants to donate $85,000 to sponsor our family reunion? Who is this person? A private donor who wishes to remain anonymous for now. My grandmother had an impact on a lot of people during her life. This person wants to honor that impact, but they have one condition. The donation is contingent on me receiving a seat at the main table during the Saturday dinner. Not table 18, a proper seat, with the rest of the family. I don't understand. Why would a donor care where you sit? Because this donor believes family should be judged by character and contribution, not just by salary. They're making a point about values, and if the family can't accommodate that simple request, they'll withdraw the offer and find another cause to support. I could practically hear Patricia calculating. $85,000 versus her seating chart preferences, money versus pride, practicality versus her need to maintain social hierarchies. "Let me discuss this with the planning committee," she said finally, "but I'm sure we can accommodate your donors' wishes. It would be wonderful to have the full budget available. We could really make this reunion everything we hoped." "Wonderful. My contact will be in touch through their financial representative. Everything will be handled professionally. The funds will be transferred within 48 hours. Marcus, can I ask, who is this person? How do you even know someone who can casually donate $85,000? My grandmother taught me that you never know what impact you might have on someone's life. Sometimes the people we help remember us in unexpected ways." Which was true, even if the person remembering and honoring my grandmother in this case was me. I hung up and immediately called Grace back to set the next phase in motion. Over the following 3 weeks, the money was transferred through her firm. Patricia received the funds with barely concealed astonishment. Apparently, she'd half expected the mysterious donor to back out. The reunion planning kicked into high gear. The original budget was restored, with enough extra to add things they'd cut. A better band for the Saturday dinner, premium bar service, upgraded meal options, a professional photographer and videographer to document the whole event. The family was buzzing with speculation about who this generous anonymous donor was. Theories flew through the family group chat that I was still part of but rarely participated in. Maybe it was someone Grandma Dorothy had helped during her volunteer work. Maybe it was an old friend from her church. Maybe it was someone from the community who'd benefited from one of the Morrison family's various charitable activities over the years. No one suggested it might be me. That possibility apparently never even occurred to them. I watched the speculation with a mix of amusement and sadness. My family knew so little about my actual life, my actual capabilities, my actual financial situation. They'd created this narrative about who I was, the disappointing family member who'd settled for a mediocre career, and they'd never bothered to question whether that narrative was accurate. 2 days before the reunion, I received the updated seating chart from Patricia. There I was, Table 1, Seat 7, right next to my parents across from my Uncle Robert, 3 seats down from my grandfather. A seat at the table, the one reserved for family members who mattered. Patricia had included a note. "Your generous donor made their request very clear. We're honored to accommodate it. I hope you'll thank them on behalf of the family for making this reunion possible." I would. Eventually. I packed for the reunion with more care than usual. Brought my best clothes, my nicest watch, a vintage piece my grandmother had given me that I rarely wore because it didn't fit my daily life, but that was worth considerably more than anything my family would be wearing. Made sure I looked like someone who belonged at that main table, not because their approval mattered, but because I wanted them to understand, finally and completely, exactly what they'd been dismissing all these years. The Riverside Resort and Conference Center was exactly as impressive as the photos had promised. I arrived Friday afternoon, checked into my room, a suite I'd upgraded to using my own money, because if I was doing this, I was doing it properly, and then headed down to the welcome reception. The lobby was already filling with Morrisons. I recognized most of them, though many I hadn't seen in years. The older generation looking distinguished in expensive casual wear. My parents' generation looking prosperous and self-satisfied. My generation looking like younger versions of their parents, already well on their way to the same comfortable success. And then there was me, standing near the registration table with my name tag, watching my family members arrive and greet each other with the easy warmth of people who saw each other regularly, who'd maintained relationships, who belonged to something I'd never quite been part of. Marcus? My mother spotted me and came over, her smile bright, but her eyes already assessing me, probably cataloging everything about my appearance that fell short of her expectations. You made it. We weren't sure you'd come. Why wouldn't I come? Oh, you know. You're always so busy with your library work. And I know these big family events aren't really your thing. Grandma Dorothy would have wanted me here. Her smile tightened. Yes, well, she would have wanted all of us here. That's why we're making this so special. She glanced around the lobby. Have you heard anything more about our mysterious donor? Patricia has been going crazy trying to figure out who it is. Someone apparently donated almost $100,000 to fund the reunion. Can you imagine having that kind of money to just give away? Some people value family legacy. I suppose, though I have to say, it's a bit odd that they made that request about your seating. Patricia said they insisted you be at the main table. Do you know why? Maybe they think I deserve to be there. She laughed, actually laughed. Well, it's their money. If they want to waste a main table seat if they have specific seating requests, we're happy to accommodate them. You'll be right next to Dad and me tomorrow night. Won't that be nice? She walked away before I could answer, moving on to greet other arriving family members with more genuine warmth than she'd shown me. I spent the welcome reception making small talk with distant cousins, accepting condescending questions about my life with practiced patience. Yes, I still worked at the library. Yes, I enjoyed it. No, I wasn't thinking about going back to school for something more practical. Yes, I was still single. No, I wasn't worried about that. The subtext of every conversation. Isn't it sad that Marcus never amounted to anything? Friday evening passed. Saturday morning brought the family history presentation, which was actually interesting despite being presented by my Uncle Robert with his typical self-importance. The Morrison family had a longer and more varied history than I'd realized. Farmers and teachers and small business owners, all the way back. People who'd worked hard and built lives they were proud of. Not all of them had been wealthy or impressive by modern standards. But they'd mattered. Saturday afternoon was activities. Golf, spa treatments, pool time, various options for different interests. I skipped most of it, spending the time in my room going over what I'd planned for the evening, making sure I had everything I needed, trying not to be nervous about what was coming. At 6 p.m., we gathered for the formal dinner. The conference center's ballroom had been transformed into something elegant and impressive, far more sophisticated than any Morrison family event I'd attended before. Round tables covered with white tablecloths and elaborate floral centerpieces arranged in perfect symmetry across the polished floor. A head table positioned on a raised platform at the front of the room, giving the occupants a clear view of everyone else while literally elevating them above the rest of the family. A small stage with a professional podium and microphone system. Mood lighting that created an atmosphere of elegance and importance. A live band setting up in the corner, professional musicians hired to provide entertainment rather than someone's cousin with a guitar, like at previous reunions. This was the kind of event the extended Morrison family had been building toward for years. A demonstration of collective success, a showcase of prosperity, a physical manifestation of the idea that the Morrisons had arrived, had achieved, had become the kind of family that held events at luxury resorts with professional staff and multi-course meals. 140 family members in formal wear began finding their seats according to Patricia's carefully orchestrated seating chart that she'd revised and printed and placed at every seat with calligraphic name cards. I watched the main table fill up first, as it always did at these events. The accomplished Morrisons gravitating toward their assigned seats of honor like it was their natural right. Uncle Robert the surgeon, looking distinguished in his expensive suit, talking about a medical conference he'd just returned from. Aunt Caroline the attorney, elegant in designer evening wear, discussing a case she'd won that had made regional news. My cousin David, who'd founded a tech startup that had recently secured Series B funding, young and confident and clearly destined for greater things. My brother Trevor, who worked in finance and made enough money to afford a downtown condo and expensive cars and regular vacations to places most people only dreamed about. These were the people my family valued, the ones who'd proven themselves according to Morrison family standards, the ones whose accomplishments could be easily quantified and impressively stated at dinner parties and family gatherings. And then there were the outer tables, filling with the younger cousins still in college or graduate school, the ones just starting their careers, the ones who hadn't yet accumulated enough visible success to warrant better seating. I watched them take their places without protest, accepting their position in the family hierarchy as natural and inevitable, probably assuming they'd earn their way to better tables at future reunions once they'd proven their worth. I wondered how many of them would spend years trying to measure up to impossible standards. How many would choose careers they didn't love because those careers would impress the family? How many would live beyond their means, trying to look successful rather than actually building sustainable financial security? How many would eventually find themselves at table 18, or its equivalent, being judged by people who didn't know anything about their actual lives? I found my seat at table 1, seat 7, right next to my parents, across from Uncle Robert, 3 seats down from my grandfather, who was the guest of honor tonight by virtue of being the oldest living Morrison. My mother was already seated, arranging her napkin and checking her makeup in a compact mirror. She looked up as I approached, and her eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "You're actually sitting here? At our table?" I knew the donor had requested it, but I half expected you to decline. To sit somewhere else where you'd be more comfortable. Why would I be more comfortable somewhere else? She looked flustered. I just meant, you know how these formal dinners can be. All the talk about careers and achievements and business ventures. I thought you might prefer to sit with the younger cousins where the conversation is more casual. I'm 34 years old, Mom. I'm not sitting at the kids' table. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. You meant that I'd be more comfortable with people whose careers aren't impressive, because my career isn't impressive. You meant I'd fit in better with people who haven't achieved much, because I haven't achieved much by your standards. She opened her mouth to respond, but my father arrived, breaking the tension by taking his seat and immediately engaging Uncle Robert in conversation about golf scores. My mother gave me a look that was equal parts hurt and defensive, but she didn't continue the argument. The rest of the main table filled. Aunt Patricia, who'd organized this entire event, looking proud and stressed in equal measure, my sister Vanessa, and her husband Chad. Several other high-achieving family members whose presence at this table was unquestioned because their worth was obvious to everyone. Dinner was served in courses, the kind of elaborate meal you get at expensive events where presentation matters as much as taste. First course, an artfully arranged salad with ingredients I couldn't identify and a dressing that probably cost more per ounce than the groceries I bought for a week. Second course, soup in delicate porcelain bowls, served by waitstaff who'd been trained to work from the left and remove from the right and never let their serving implements touch the rim of the bowl. Main course, a choice of 3 entrees, each prepared by the resort's executive chef, each plated like a work of art. The conversation at our table was exactly what I'd expected. Talk about business and investments and career advancement and real estate and all the markers of success that the Morrison family valued. Uncle Robert describing a complex surgery he'd performed that had saved someone's life, managing to make even that humanitarian act sound like a personal achievement rather than a service to another human being. Aunt Caroline discussing a high-profile case her firm had taken on, dropping names of important clients and impressive companies. My brother Trevor explaining his latest investment strategy in terms I wasn't sure he fully understood himself, but that sounded sophisticated and impressive. Nobody asked me about my work. Nobody inquired about my life. When conversation did turn toward me, it was my mother explaining to the table that I was still at the library, still enjoying that, in a tone that made it clear she found it both quaint and slightly embarrassing. I ate my expensive meal and listened to the conversations swirling around me and thought about the check I'd written to make all of this possible. The $85,000 that had covered the venue, the food, the band, the photographer, all the professional services that had transformed a family reunion into a production worthy of the Morrison name. They had no idea. They were sitting here eating my food, enjoying my generosity, benefiting from my financial contribution, and they still treated me like I didn't quite belong at this table. The irony was almost funny. Almost. After dessert, individual soufflés that must have required considerable kitchen coordination to serve all at once while still properly risen. Patricia stood and made her way to the stage. The room gradually quieted, conversations tapering off as people turned their attention to the front. The band stopped playing mid-song. Waitstaff retreated to the edges of the room. Even the clink of silverware and glasses ceased as 140 family members gave their full attention to the woman at the podium. Patricia adjusted the microphone, took a breath, and smiled out at the assembled family with the satisfaction of someone who'd pulled off something difficult and impressive. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice amplified and clear, carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "I hope you've all enjoyed dinner. The chef here is absolutely phenomenal, and I think we can all agree that the meal tonight exceeded our expectations. The resort has been wonderful to work with, the staff has been professional and attentive, and I'm so pleased we chose this venue for such an important occasion." Polite applause. Agreement. People nodded and smiled, satisfied with the quality of the event they were experiencing. "We wanted to make this reunion special," Patricia continued. "Not just another family gathering, but something memorable, something worthy of the occasion we're celebrating. This year marks what would have been Dorothy Morrison's 90th birthday, and we thought the best way to honor her memory was to bring the entire family together in a way that reflected the values she held dear: family, tradition, and excellence." More nods, more agreement. Dorothy had been respected by everyone, even if most of them hadn't bothered to visit her regularly during her final years. In death, she'd become a symbol everyone could rally around without the messy reality of actually maintaining a relationship with her. "Planning an event of this scale was challenging," Patricia said. "The original budget was $180,000, a significant sum that reflected our ambition for this reunion. We wanted the best venue, the best food, the best entertainment. We wanted something that would honor Dorothy's memory properly. But funding that budget required contributions from multiple family members, and despite generous donations from many of you, we found ourselves coming up short." She paused, letting the financial reality sink in. Letting people remember that this level of excellence required resources, that impressive events didn't just happen without someone paying for them. "We were about $85,000 short of our goal," Patricia said. "We'd started making difficult decisions about what to cut. Maybe we'd have to downgrade the meal, maybe eliminate some of the activities we'd planned, maybe find a less expensive venue. It was disappointing, because we all wanted this reunion to be truly special." I watched faces around the room, saw people nodding in understanding, probably relieved they hadn't been asked to contribute more than they'd already given. The Morrison family was successful, yes, but $85,000 was still real money, not the kind of sum most people could casually produce for a family event. But then, something extraordinary happened, Patricia said, and now there was real excitement in her voice, real amazement. "We received a call from an anonymous donor, someone who'd heard about our plans for this reunion, who believed in honoring family legacy, who wanted to make sure Dorothy Morrison's memory was celebrated properly. This person, this incredibly generous benefactor, offered to cover the entire remaining balance, all $85,000, plus a bit extra to restore things we'd cut from the original budget." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. People looked at each other, speculating. Who could afford that? Who would be that generous for a family event they weren't even part of? The mystery of it added to the drama, made the moment more significant. At first I thought it might be a mistake, Patricia continued, or maybe some kind of elaborate joke. But within 48 hours, the money was transferred through a financial management firm. All $85,000, just as promised. Suddenly, we had the full budget. We could book the presidential suite, hire the better band, upgrade the meal, add back all the special touches that make this reunion what it is tonight. She gestured around the ballroom at the elegant decorations and professional service and obvious expense of everything they were experiencing. The donor wished to remain anonymous initially, Patricia said. They wanted their contribution to speak for itself, without personal recognition or fanfare. But they also made one condition for their donation. One specific request that seemed small at the time, but has come to mean much more as I've reflected on it. Another pause. The room was completely silent now, everyone leaning forward slightly, waiting for the revelation they knew was coming. The donor requested that a specific family member, someone who'd originally been assigned to table 18 in the back of the room, be given a seat at the main table, a real seat, with family. They said this seating change was non-negotiable. If we couldn't accommodate it, they'd withdraw the donation and find another cause to support. I felt people starting to look around now, trying to figure out who'd been moved from table 18 to table 1, trying to identify which unlikely family member had somehow warranted this special treatment. I was confused by this request at first, Patricia admitted. Why would a donor care about seating arrangements? What did it matter where one person sat? But the donor was insistent. They said this was about values, about not judging people by their job titles or their salaries, about recognizing that family members should be valued for who they are, not just for how impressive they look on paper. She let that statement resonate for a moment. This donor wished to remain anonymous initially, Patricia repeated, but they've agreed to let me reveal who they are tonight. And I have to tell you, when I learned the truth about our mysterious benefactor, when I discovered who'd given nearly $100,000 to make this reunion possible, I was absolutely shocked, stunned, completely taken aback, because it was someone we all know, someone sitting in this room right now, someone who many of us, myself included, had made assumptions about, someone we'd underestimated. The room was absolutely silent now, the kind of silence that happens when everyone is holding their breath simultaneously, when anticipation has reached its peak, and any sound would break the spell. Ladies and gentlemen, family members, Morrison clan gathered here tonight, Patricia said, and she was smiling now, a complicated smile that mixed genuine appreciation with visible embarrassment. I'm honored and humbled to announce that our main sponsor, our generous benefactor, the person who made this entire reunion possible, is Dorothy Morrison's grandson, Marcus Morrison. For exactly 3 seconds, I counted them, nothing happened, complete silence, complete stillness. Like the entire room had been frozen mid-breath, like time itself had stopped to process this information that didn't fit anyone's understanding of reality. Then it happened. 140 heads turned toward me. All at once. A synchronized motion like a flock of birds changing direction simultaneously. Every single person in that ballroom, from my grandfather at the head of the main table to the youngest cousins at the farthest tables, swiveling their attention to stare at me with expressions that ranged from shock to disbelief to confusion to something that might have been respect, but looked more like they were trying to recalculate everything they thought they knew. My mother's mouth was actually open, her lips parted in the middle of whatever word she'd been about to say. My father looked like someone had struck him across the face, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. Uncle Robert had frozen with his wine glass halfway to his lips, suspended in mid-motion like a statue. Aunt Caroline was blinking rapidly, her lawyer's brain probably trying to process data that didn't compute with her established understanding of family dynamics. The cousins at the outer tables were whispering to each other in urgent, confused tones. Who was Marcus? Why didn't they know about this? How did the librarian have $100,000 to give away? The younger generation looked confused. This random family member they barely knew had done what now? The older generation looked stunned. Their comfortable assumptions about success and worth and family hierarchies suddenly called into question. If the library worker could casually donate $85,000, what did that say about their own achievements? What did that say about how they'd been treating him? Trevor's expression was particularly complex. Embarrassment and surprise and something that might have been admiration mixed with the dawning realization that he'd been completely wrong about his younger brother for years. Vanessa had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide, looking like she might actually be close to tears. Patricia gestured for me to come to the stage. The motion seemed to break the spell. People started breathing again, whispering to each other in urgent tones, trying to process what they'd just heard. I stood slowly, taking my time, adjusting my jacket, the expensive one I'd bought specifically for this evening, the one that probably cost more than most people realized, the one that signaled I belonged at this event even if my family hadn't believed it. I walked through the suddenly parted crowd toward the podium. People physically leaned away as I passed, like they needed space to recalibrate their understanding of who I was, what I represented, where I fit in the family structure they thought they understood. The walk to the stage felt like it took hours, even though it was probably only 30 seconds. Every eye in the room tracked my movement. Every conversation had stopped. Every person was focused entirely on me in a way they never had been before. Patricia handed me the microphone, stepping back to give me the stage. Her expression was complicated. Gratitude mixed with confusion, mixed with something that looked like embarrassment, like she was realizing in real time how badly she'd misjudged me, how wrong the family had been about who deserved respect and recognition. I looked out at the ballroom, at 140 faces staring at me with expressions I'd never seen before: shock, confusion, curiosity, reassessment. At the main table where I'd been given a seat only because the mysterious donor had demanded it, my parents and uncle and aunt and siblings all frozen in various states of disbelief. At table 18 in the back where I'd originally been assigned, empty now, but representing everything about how my family had viewed me for years. At my grandfather at the head table, who was smiling slightly, maybe he'd suspected, or maybe he was just pleased to see his grandson surprising everyone. I took a breath and began to speak, my voice steady and amplified by the microphone system that had been paid for with my money. "Thank you, Patricia," I said. "I appreciate the recognition, though I have to admit I wasn't looking for it when I made this contribution. I didn't sponsor this reunion for applause or gratitude. I did it for more complicated reasons that I think are important for everyone to understand." The room remained silent, attentive in a way they'd never been when I spoke before. 3 weeks ago, I continued, I was on a family video call to discuss logistics for this reunion. Patricia was going through the seating chart for tonight's dinner, assigning the best seats, the ones at the main table, closest to the head table, to family members who'd achieved what she called visible success. The seats of honor were reserved for people who'd proven their worth through impressive careers and high salaries, for people who exemplified what the Morrison family stands for. I paused, letting people remember that call, letting them realize where this was going. And then we got to me, the librarian, the one who'd chosen a career that doesn't pay particularly well by Morrison family standards. Patricia assigned me to table 18, way in the back of this room, about as far from the head table as you can get, while still technically being in the same event. She explained that seats needed to be prioritized for family members who'd achieved more, and I quote, visible success. I could see Patricia's face going red, see other people looking uncomfortable as they remembered being part of that call, or hearing about it, or agreeing with the logic behind those seating assignments. I was told, essentially, that I didn't deserve a seat at the family table, that my accomplishments weren't impressive enough to warrant sitting with the successful people, that someone who makes $58,000 a year as a librarian should be relegated to the back, seated with the younger cousins who, quote, haven't quite established themselves yet. Because in this family, apparently, worth is measured by salary and status. If you can't point to an impressive job title or a high income, you don't deserve to be treated with respect. The discomfort in the room was palpable now. People shifting in their seats, avoiding eye contact, realizing they were complicit in this value system I was calling out. I didn't argue about the seating assignment, I said. I just quietly accepted it and moved on with my life. But I also made a decision. If my family was going to judge people by their financial contributions, by their ability to fund expensive events, and impress others with their wealth, then maybe it was time they learned exactly what I was capable of contributing. So I called my financial advisor, who's been managing my investments for the past 8 years, and I arranged to transfer $85,000, the exact amount needed to fund the remaining cost of this reunion. I could see people doing math in their heads, trying to figure out how the librarian had $85,000 to give away, trying to reconcile this information with what they thought they knew about my life. But I didn't reveal myself as the donor, I continued. I worked through Grace's financial management firm, made the contribution anonymous initially. The only condition I placed on the donation was that I'd receive a proper seat at tonight's dinner, not table 18, a real seat, with family. Because I wanted to make a point about assumptions and worth and the danger of judging people by incomplete information. I stopped and looked directly at my parents. You see, my family knows almost nothing about my actual life beyond the basic facts you've chosen to focus on. You know I'm a librarian. You know I make $58,000 a year from that job. You know I live in a modest house and drive a 10-year-old car and don't take expensive vacations. And from those facts, you've constructed an entire narrative about who I am and what I'm worth. A narrative about failure and disappointment and settling for less because I couldn't achieve more. My mother was crying now, tears streaming down her face. My father was staring at the table. But what you don't know, what you've never bothered to ask about or show any interest in learning, is that I've been investing carefully since I was 22 years old. That I started reading about personal finance and wealth building when I was still in college. That I've been following a disciplined savings strategy for 12 years, living modestly not because I have to, but because I choose to. Because I learned that the path to actual financial security isn't about how much you earn. It's about how much you keep and grow. I paused to let that sink in. What you don't know is that over the past 12 years, through careful investing and compound growth and consistent contributions, I've built an investment portfolio worth over $400,000, that I own my house outright, paid off the mortgage 3 years ago using money I'd been saving since I bought the place, that I have no debt, not student loans, not credit cards, nothing, that I could walk away from my job tomorrow and live comfortably on my investments for the rest of my life if I wanted to. Uncle Robert had set down his wine glass with a hand that was visibly shaking. Aunt Caroline was staring at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. My cousins at the outer tables were leaning forward, hanging on every word. What you don't know is that I've been offered higher-paying jobs multiple times over the years. Positions with better salaries, more impressive titles, more prestige, and I've turned every single one of them down. Not because I couldn't get those jobs or succeed in them, but because I genuinely love the work I do. Because helping people access information and resources matters to me. Because running literacy programs and supporting my community brings me more satisfaction than a bigger paycheck ever could. Because I measured success by meaning and impact rather than by salary, and I deliberately chose the life I have. I looked around the room, making eye contact with people who'd dismissed me for years. What you don't know is that I serve on professional boards that value my expertise, that I've published papers in library science journals that other professionals in my field actually read and reference, that I've created programs that have served thousands of people in my community, that I've won awards for innovation in public library services, that I do work that actually changes lives, even if it doesn't come with a six-figure income or an impressive business card. The room was absolutely silent now. Not the anticipatory silence from before, but something heavier, more contemplative. People were listening, really listening, maybe for the first time. My grandmother Dorothy knew all of this, I said, and my voice softened slightly. She was the only one who bothered to ask about my life instead of making assumptions based on my job title. She came to my programs at the library, showed up to children's story times and adult literacy workshops and community events, supporting me not despite my career choice, but because she understood it. She read the papers I published, even though they were probably dry and academic, and not her usual reading material. She was proud of me, not in a condescending way, not in an "isn't it nice that Marcus found something he enjoys" way, but genuinely proud. Because she understood that success isn't just about accumulating money. I took a breath, steadying myself. She understood that choosing meaningful work over maximum income is its own kind of success. That living within your means and building real financial security through discipline rather than just chasing bigger salaries is actually harder and more impressive than it looks. That being able to walk away from your job because you've achieved financial independence gives you a kind of freedom that people making 3 times your salary often don't have, because they've trapped themselves in expensive lifestyles they can't sustain. I looked directly at Trevor, who'd made that in a month comment. She understood that the person making $58,000 with no debt and $400,000 in investments is actually in a much better financial position than someone making $150,000 who spends $160,000 trying to look successful. That net worth matters more than income. That financial security matters more than impressive cars and expensive houses and luxury vacations you can't actually afford. Trevor looked away, his face flushed. I funded this reunion because Grandma Dorothy would have wanted us all here together, I said, my voice stronger now. Because despite everything, despite years of being treated like I didn't measure up, family still matters to me. Because I could afford to contribute $85,000 without significantly impacting my financial security. And because I wanted to teach a lesson that I hope some of you have learned tonight. I paused, looking around the room one more time. You can't judge a person's worth by their job title or their salary. You can't measure success by income alone or prestige alone, or how impressive someone looks on paper. You can't assign seats at the family table based on your assumptions about who matters most, because you might not actually know who you're dismissing. You might not know what they're capable of. You might not understand what they've built, or achieved, or chosen deliberately, rather than defaulted into. The silence continued. The person you've been treating as the family disappointment for the past decade had the resources to fund half this reunion without blinking. The librarian you've been condescending to has more financial freedom than most of you will achieve in your lifetimes. The family member you assigned to table 18 in the back just bought himself a seat at the main table, literally, physically, bought it with his own money, because he decided it was time you learned what assumptions cost. I set the microphone down on the podium and looked one more time at 140 stunned faces staring back at me. Enjoy the rest of your evening, I said. The meal you've been eating, the band you've been listening to, the photographer capturing your memories, all funded by the disappointing family member who apparently didn't deserve a good seat. I hope it was worth it. Then I walked off the stage and returned to my seat at table 1, leaving behind a room full of people who finally understood exactly what they'd been missing all these years. I handed the microphone back to Patricia and returned to my seat. The room erupted in noise, people talking over each other, asking questions, trying to process what they'd just heard. My mother grabbed my hand. "Marcus, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was making it up to feel better about my modest career?" She didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. The rest of the evening was surreal. People I'd barely spoken to in years suddenly wanted to talk to me. Cousins who'd dismissed me earlier were now asking about my investment strategies. Uncles who'd condescended to me were now treating me with something approaching respect. I answered questions politely, but without warmth, accepted congratulations without pretending this changed anything fundamental about our relationships. Made it clear that funding one reunion didn't mean I'd forgotten years of being treated like I didn't matter. When people asked why I'd lived so modestly despite having money, I told them the truth. Because I'd learned from my grandmother that the size of your bank account doesn't define your character, that living within your means and finding satisfaction in meaningful work was more important than impressing people with expensive things. By the end of the night, the family dynamics had shifted in ways both visible and subtle. People looked at me differently, talked to me differently, treated me like someone who'd earned the right to be at the main table. But the thing was, I'd always had that right. I'd always deserved respect, regardless of my bank balance or my job title or my investment portfolio. They just hadn't bothered to see it until I'd proved it in the only language they really understood: money. Sunday morning brought the farewell brunch, which had a different atmosphere than any previous family gathering I'd attended. People sought me out deliberately, rather than simply tolerating my presence. Conversations felt more genuine, less condescending. The family members who'd barely acknowledged me before now wanted to know about my life, my work, my future plans. My brother Trevor cornered me by the buffet table. "I owe you an apology. I've been dismissive of you for years. Thought you'd settled for less because you couldn't do better. I was wrong." "You were," I agreed, not making it easy for him. "Why didn't you ever say anything? Why did you let us all think—" "Think what? That I was poor? Unsuccessful? Not worth your time?" I kept my voice level. "Would you have listened if I'd tried to explain? Or would you have accused me of being defensive about my choices?" He didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. Similar conversations happened throughout brunch. Aunt Caroline admitting she'd underestimated me. Cousin David wanting to hear about my investment strategies. My sister Vanessa looking embarrassed about years of subtle put-downs. My parents were the most affected. They pulled me aside after brunch as people were saying their goodbyes and heading home. "Your mother and I need to apologize," my father said, and he actually looked genuine. "We've been terrible to you, treating you like a disappointment when we should have been proud, making you feel like you didn't belong when you were doing better than most of us in the ways that actually matter. You don't get to rewrite history now that you know I have money," I said. "You treated me the way you did because you genuinely believed I was less than, that my career choice was embarrassing, that I'd failed somehow. The money doesn't change what you thought of me. It just made you reconsider whether you were right." "That's fair," my mother said quietly. "But we want to do better. We want to actually know you, not the version we created in our heads, but the real you. That's going to take time. Years of damage don't get fixed with one conversation. We understand. We're willing to put in the work if you'll let us." I nodded, not quite ready to forgive but willing to leave the door open. "We'll see." Patricia approached as I was loading my car to leave. She looked uncomfortable, clutching her phone like a security blanket. "Marcus, I owe you a massive apology. The way I handled the seating chart, telling you that you didn't deserve a seat at the main table, that was unconscionable. I let assumptions about income dictate how I treated family members. I'm mortified." "You should be." "I am. Truly. And I want you to know that your grandmother would have been so proud of you. Not just for the money you gave, though that was incredibly generous, but for living according to your values, for choosing meaningful work over maximum income, for building real financial security through discipline, rather than just chasing bigger salaries. She always said you were the one who really understood what mattered. She was the only one who bothered to look." "I know, and I'm sorry we didn't. I'm sorry I didn't." She paused. Can I ask you something? Why did you actually do it? Sponsor the reunion? Was it really just to prove a point? I thought about that. Partly, but also because Grandma Dorothy deserved to be honored properly. Because family does matter, even when they're frustrating and judgmental and wrong about you. Because I could afford it without hurting myself financially. And because I wanted to teach a lesson that maybe, possibly, some of you might learn. Did we learn it? I don't know yet. Check back in a year and see if you're still treating me differently, or if this just becomes a funny story about the time the librarian surprised everyone. I finished loading my car and drove home, leaving behind the resort and the reunion and 140 family members who now knew things about me they'd never bothered to learn before.